Welcome to Life Stories, where real moments remind us of the power of courage, empathy, and standing up for what's right. Today's story takes us inside Westbrook Elementary, where a new janitor, Jack Carter, begins what he hopes will be a fresh start. But when he notices strange behavior from the principal toward a young girl, Madison, he quickly realizes that something isn't right. What he uncovers is shocking, and will change the school forever. Stay tuned to find out what happens next. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to start today's powerful journey. I never expected to start over at 40. Life had a strange way of forcing me into new beginnings. And stepping into Westbrook Elementary as a janitor wasn't exactly the fresh start I had imagined. But after spending years in the shadows of a luxury hotel, overlooked, mistreated, and made to feel like I didn't belong, this job felt like a quiet rebellion, a chance to carve out something of my own. The hallways smelled of floor wax and dry erase markers, a scent so different from the crisp linens and expensive colognes of the hotel I used to clean. It was my second day on the job, and I still felt like an outsider. The uniform was stiff, the name tag foreign on my chest. Yet, as I pushed my cleaning cart down the corridor, listening to the distant chatter of children, I felt something I hadn't in years: hope. The playground was alive with laughter when I arrived. The sun cast long shadows over the slides and swings. The crisp autumn air filled with the sounds of sneakers squeaking against the blacktop and the high-pitched shrieks of carefree children. A small group of kids noticed me right away, their curiosity evident in the way they whispered and pointed. A boy, no older than 6, tugged at my sleeve. "What are you doing, mister?" I smiled, dipping my mop into the bucket. "I'm making sure you don't slip and fall. Ever stepped in something sticky and couldn't move?" I exaggerated a silly walk, pretending my feet were glued to the ground. The kids erupted into laughter, and for a brief moment, I felt warmth spread through my chest. They didn't see me as less than, didn't judge me for being a janitor. To them, I was just another adult who happened to have a mop. But my joy was short-lived. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a girl sitting alone on a bench near the lockers. She wasn't like the others, who played and shouted without a care in the world. Her posture was tense, her small hands gripping a carton of milk. She was black, the only black child I had seen at the school so far. Just as she was about to take a sip, another student, caught up in a game of chase, slammed into her. The milk splattered across her hands, her shoes, and the freshly mopped floor. "Hey, watch out," she shouted, her voice edged with frustration. The boy who bumped into her barely noticed, already running off. I expected her to call after him, to demand an apology, but she didn't. Instead, she stared at the mess on her hands, the damp stain spreading across her sneakers. Looking lost, I grabbed a box of tissues from my cart and knelt beside her. "Here," I said gently, "this should help." She looked at me, startled, then took the tissues and wiped her hands. "Thanks," she muttered, her voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. "Don't worry about the floor," I reassured her. "I've got it covered." As I mopped up the spilled milk, I noticed the way she watched me. There was something in her eyes, relief, maybe, or gratitude, but there was something else too. Something heavier. "Are you new here?" I asked, trying to make conversation. She hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, my name's Madison." "Nice to meet you, Madison." I wanted to ask more, to understand why she looked so out of place. But before I could, the school bell rang. The playground erupted into movement, kids rushing toward the doors. I stood back, watching them disappear into the school. But Madison didn't move right away. She waited until the last student had entered before finally making her way toward the classroom. It felt deliberate, like she didn't want to go in with the others. Just as she reached the door, I heard a sharp voice from inside. "Madison, you're late again. What did I say about being in class before I walk in?" She froze. From where I stood, I could see her staring at her shoes, shoulders hunched. The teacher, Ms. Turner, sighed in frustration and ushered her inside. I pushed my mop forward, but my mind stayed on Madison. Why had she waited? Why did she look so afraid? I had been the new kid once. I knew what it felt like to be different, to be treated as an outsider. But this felt like something more. A deeper kind of loneliness. As I continued my rounds, I tried to shake the feeling. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe it was nothing. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't nothing. And I had a bad feeling that today was going to change everything. The school hallways felt eerily quiet now that the students were in their classrooms. My mop glided over the floor. My movements mechanical, but my mind kept circling back to Madison. There was something about the way she lingered outside the classroom. Something about how Ms. Turner spoke to her, sharp, impatient, like she was already expecting Madison to be a problem. I had seen that kind of treatment before. I pushed my cart toward the administration wing. The distant hum of teachers lecturing drifting through the air. I knew I had work to do. But I also knew I needed to keep an eye on things. As I passed by the principal's office, the door swung open, and out walked Mr. Reynolds, tall, with graying hair and an expression that made my stomach turn. He wasn't alone. He had Madison by the arm. She wasn't struggling, but her body was tense. Her shoulders curled inward like she was trying to make herself smaller. Mr. Reynolds' grip wasn't tight enough to hurt her, but it was firm enough to send a message. He wasn't just leading her somewhere, he was making sure she had no choice but to follow. I stopped in my tracks. "Good morning, sir," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Everything all right?" Mr. Reynolds blinked, his gaze flickering over me as if I was an afterthought. "Of course," he said, his tone clipped. "This student just needs a reminder about following the rules." I glanced at Madison. She didn't look up. "Rules?" I repeated, keeping my voice even. "She seems like a good kid to me." Something flickered across his face, irritation. But it was gone in an instant. "Mr. Carter, isn't it?" His voice was smooth now. Almost pleasant, but I could hear the edge beneath it. "You're new here. It's best not to concern yourself with matters beyond your position." I knew a dismissal when I heard one. But I also knew when someone was trying to cover something up. He didn't wait for me to respond. Instead, he steered Madison down the hall. Away from the classrooms. Away from where anyone else could see them. I stood there, my fingers tightening around the mop handle. Something about this wasn't right. I didn't know what was happening. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about following rules. And whatever Mr. Reynolds had planned, Madison didn't deserve it. I forced myself to move, to keep working, but my gut twisted with unease. Then, as I rounded the corner near the front office, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Mr. Reynolds' voice, low and sharp, drifting through the air from inside his office. "No more black students at my school. We need to protect our community and our children." I froze. My grip tightened on the mop. My heart pounding against my ribs. I had just walked into something much bigger than I ever expected. I stood there, my breath caught in my throat. Did I just hear that right? Mr. Reynolds' voice was clear. Steady, like he wasn't even trying to hide it. He was talking to someone over the phone. And though I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, his words were enough to turn my stomach. "No more black students at my school. We need to protect our community and our children." The words echoed in my head, each one heavier than the last. I knew racism wasn't dead. I had lived through enough to know that. But hearing it spoken so plainly, so unapologetically, by the principal of an elementary school, it made my blood boil. I stepped back, careful not to make a sound. If Mr. Reynolds saw me standing outside his office, I knew I'd be done for. I wasn't about to lose my job over a hunch. Not without knowing exactly what I was dealing with. I needed to be smart. I had barely turned the corner when I heard it, a scream. A child's scream. It came from the direction of the girls' restroom. I didn't think. I ran. As I reached the door, Madison burst out, tears streaming down her face. Her small body was shaking. Her hands clenched into fists. The moment she saw me, she froze, her eyes filled with something between fear and relief. I barely had time to register the look on her face before Mr. Reynolds emerged from the bathroom stall. Something inside me snapped. "What the hell were you doing in there?" I demanded, stepping between them. His face twisted into a sneer. "This is none of your concern." I looked at Madison, who was still trembling, still too stunned to speak. But she didn't have to. I had seen enough. I gripped my mop, my hands tightening around the wooden handle. I think it is. Mr. Reynolds took a step forward. His face was red with anger now. You're just a janitor. He spat. Know your place. I should have backed down. I should have walked away. But I didn't. I swung the mop. It wasn't a hard hit. But it was enough to make contact. Enough to send a spray of dirty water across his pristine dress shirt. Enough to shock him. The hallway went silent. Mr. Reynolds' face turned a deep shade of crimson. His hands clenched into fists. You're fired. He snarled. You black criminal. I barely heard him. Because behind me, teachers and students were stepping out of their classrooms. Drawn by the commotion, eyes widened, whispers spread. Mr. Reynolds saw them too. For the first time, there was something in his expression that looked a lot like fear. The silence in the hallway stretched. Thick and suffocating. Teachers, students, and even a few staff members stood frozen, their eyes darting between Mr. Reynolds, Madison, and me. Then, Eileen, the school receptionist, pushed her way to the front of the crowd. Her face twisted in alarm. What's going on here? She asked, looking from me to the principal. Before I could speak, Mr. Reynolds straightened, puffing out his chest like he still had control of the situation. This janitor just assaulted me. He barked. And he's been following me around all morning. I want him removed immediately. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. That's not what happened, I said, my voice steady. Madison ran out of the restroom crying. I found you inside. Care to explain why a principal was in the girls' restroom with a student? A murmur rippled through the crowd. The weight of my words had landed. Madison wiped her eyes and stepped closer to me, her small frame trembling. He told me I should leave his school, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He said I don't belong here. Gasps echoed through the hallway. I saw Ms. Turner's face go pale, her eyes flicking to the other teachers. I would never, Mr. Reynolds stammered. But the panic in his eyes betrayed him. That was when the police arrived. 2 officers pushed their way through the growing crowd, their presence making the tension snap like a rubber band. The teacher who had called them, Ms. Diaz, one of the newer hires, stepped forward, explaining what she had witnessed. One of the officers, a tall man with graying hair, turned to Madison. His voice was gentle, but firm. Sweetheart, can you tell us what happened? Madison hesitated, then took a deep breath. He called me a criminal, she said. He took me to his office and told me I should come in late every day so I wouldn't be in class with the white kids. The crowd erupted into whispers again. Some of the teachers looked horrified. Others, ones I suspected already knew, remained eerily silent. I have proof, Madison added quickly. She turned to Eileen. My notebook. It's in my bag. Eileen hurried to get it. And when she returned, she handed the notebook to the officer. He flipped through the pages, his frown deepening. Written over and over in small, neat handwriting were the words. I will be late to school. I will not enter before the others. My stomach turned at the sight of it. The officer sighed, closed the notebook, and turned to Mr. Reynolds. Sir, you need to come with us. The principal's face drained of color. For the first time, he had no control. As they cuffed him and led him away, Madison's parents rushed in, their faces a mixture of fear and relief. And at that moment, I knew, I hadn't just saved Madison. I had changed something in this school forever. As the police escorted Mr. Reynolds out of Westbrook Elementary, the weight of the morning finally settled on my shoulders. The students, the teachers, the staff, everyone stood frozen, as if struggling to process what had just happened. The man who had run this school with fear and prejudice was gone. But the damage he had caused would take time to undo. Madison's parents held her tightly, whispering soft reassurances, their faces a mixture of relief and regret. We should have listened to you sooner, her mother said, stroking her daughter's hair. Madison just nodded, still shaken but no longer alone. Eileen, the receptionist, touched my arm lightly. You did something incredible today, Jack. Her voice was thick with emotion. Not everyone would have had the courage. I didn't feel like a hero. I was just a janitor. But maybe, just maybe, I had been in the right place at the right time for a reason. As I turned to leave, I felt a small tug on my sleeve. Madison looked up at me, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. I smiled, kneeling to her level. "You don't have to thank me. You were brave today. Never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong." She nodded, a new determination in her eyes. I walked out of that school knowing my time there was over. But what I had done, what we had all done together, would last far beyond a single job. And sometimes, making a difference was more important than keeping a paycheck. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more powerful real-life moments that remind us of the strength of love, courage, and justice. See you in the next one.